We want to talk and continue the series that we've been having now, these last 4 weeks, on resolving conflict biblically. Now, I think if you look at this face on the screen, you'll see that that's what we think of when we think of conflict. And that's why we're afraid of conflict. We're afraid that either we're going to look like that or the other person is going to look like that when we tell them there's a problem. And so we don't want conflict, right? Well, now last week, Dr. Les talked on Father's Day about King David as a father and how he tried to avoid conflict. I think you would all agree, though, that he did not avoid conflict. The conflict was there. The conflict was there in Amnon, and between Amnon and Absalom, and between Amnon and Tamar. And then it spread like a cancer because it wasn't dealt with. It spread like a cancer, not only through the whole family, but into the whole nation. And we saw what a poor model David was and how he would not get involved even in his own family, even between his own children. It reminds us of Eli. Do you remember the sons of Eli? And the sins they were committing in the church. They were supposed to be priests. And yet, when you would come to worship, these guys would grab one of the women and force them to have sex there when they had come to worship. When people brought their offerings, those 2 boys were taking however much of the offering they wanted. And you know what Eli did? Nothing. Nothing. Yes, they were adults. Yes, they were grown. But he was in a position as a priest that he could have removed them. He could have disciplined them. He could have at least talked to them and said, this is not going to be allowed in the house of God. Just as David should have addressed the issues between his children. But he did nothing. Like us, he kept quiet. It amazes me how Kenyans keep quiet. Let's just pretend like it's not there. Let's pretend that there is no conflict. I don't want it to get worse, so I'll do nothing. Well, that was what happened to David. David thought, I'll keep quiet and it'll go away. Did it go away? No. It got worse. He even used banishment with Absalom. And it went from intrapersonal, within, to conflict that was interpersonal between Amnon and Tamar, between Amnon and Absalom, between Absalom and David, to intragroup. So within David's family, teams, people picked teams. You know, there was the household of Amnon, then against the household of Absalom. Until it spilled over into intergroup, and it was between Absalom's army that he had gathered to try to overthrow his own father. So, and people died, guys. People died in that. There were battles. People were killed because David didn't settle the conflict when it was small. Now, I'd given you some other definitions. Here's a new definition today. This one's from Lloyd Perry, the Church Conflict Management. He says conflict occurs anytime there's a disturbance in the equilibrium and security of a protective environment. Now, those are some fancy words that means we don't like change. When something changes, we've got this nice equilibrium. Life is kind of going along the way we want it to go along, and then something happens. It disrupts that equilibrium. We've got a certain amount of security. Maybe it's security in your job. Maybe it's a nice peacefulness in your home. And something messes with that, and now you don't feel protected. You don't feel safe. You don't feel secure. Maybe, again, it's in a relationship, and you've gotten used to the relationship being a certain way, and now it's not that way anymore. Something happened. Well, we began this series by saying conflict is not a mystery. It's not a mystery. It's very understandable. And we spent the first 2 weeks just on a basic understanding of what is conflict, how does it happen, why does it happen. And we saw that conflict is inevitable. It's inevitable because, number one, we saw we're all sinners. None of us are perfect. And so we're going to make mistakes, and other people are going to make mistakes. We're all going to sin. Maybe it's small ways, it's little things, sometimes it's big things. But because we're sinners, there's going to be conflict until we all go to heaven. We also saw that there's going to be conflict because the devil is going to do his part. Count on it. Even if you don't want to sin, he will put thoughts in your mind against somebody else. And he'll put something in their mind against you. He tries to pit us against each other. He is called an accuser of the brethren. So he's going to be accusing. And if it wasn't for our sin or for the devil, just the fact that we're different. We're all different. So sometimes I don't understand you. I don't understand why you do what you do. And I know you don't understand me sometimes. Because we're different. And it doesn't mean I've done anything wrong or you've done anything wrong. So conflict is inevitable, and we looked at some other definitions. We even looked at what James said as a definition from the book of James. But we also said that in spite of our sin and in spite of what the devil's trying to do, God can still be glorified. God has a purpose. And God can use conflict to strengthen relationships. I know you still don't believe that. I'm going to keep trying to convince you week after week. But God can use it to actually strengthen your relationships, to bring about greater understanding of your differences, to get things out in the open that need to be talked about. So it doesn't have to be bad. And we looked at a number of biblical examples. And then, week before last, we looked at understanding 4 types of conflict. The 4 that I just named that, unfortunately, David in that story had all 4. The intrapersonal, interpersonal, intragroup, and intergroup. And then we looked at how there's 2 main issues. In every conflict, there are 2 main issues. Either it's substantive or it's more personal, more emotional. Now, in the case with David's family, I would say that rape and murder are pretty substantive. Those were not small issues. But you know what? He still would not deal with even those. And we saw that there's 4 underlying causes. And I would submit to you that in the example that Dr. Les used of David, the biggest cause of that conflict was faulty leadership. We talked about that in the cell group last night. Wambui turned on a light bulb for me there. That it was faulty leadership. Because if David had dealt with it quickly, simply, it would not have gone on to the depths and the extent that it did. So So we looked at understanding those basics, and I want you to continue to apply those basics in your understanding as we keep talking and as you continue to have conflict. I hope you'll take a deep breath in your next conflict and go, okay, is this substantive or just personal? Is this just inside of me, or is this, between two people, and let's deal with it before it's between a whole bunch of other people. What's going on here? Is it a misunderstanding because I had some expectations that weren't met? There was something I wanted, some territory I wanted, and I didn't get it? Is it because of faulty leadership and poor administration? Is it just differences? What's going on? What's going on? Well, I want us to see, beginning today, that not only can we understand conflict, but we can predict it. We can predict how it's going to play out. Kind of what's going to happen next. I can tell you what's going to happen next. So let's look at it. We're going to look today at the 5 stages. So we're going to look at 5 stages of conflict. And then next week we're going to look at 5 different conflict styles. Because most people have one primary style in which they like to do battle. And we'll see the pros and cons of those. But today I want us to think about what happens in a conflict. Something happens. Something happens that upsets that equilibrium. Something happens and now you feel insecure. Maybe somebody says something and you go, "What'd you say?" Now, unfortunately, you don't say that out loud. If you did, the conflict would probably stop right there. Right there. But we don't. It's in our mind. We go, "What? You disrespected me. Why did you do that? How dare you say that about me? Why is he doing that again? Can't that person ever do whatever, fill in the blank?" But something happens. And we begin to react to each other. Whatever happened, it sets in motion feelings, that's what's going on the inside of you, and behaviors, that's how you're acting. And the longer it goes on, the more destructive it becomes, just like in the case with David. The longer it goes on, we also tend to shift our focus from what was the real issue to now all these other things we're upset about. So let's see how that happens. So again, something happens. This is a typical conflict situation. Something happens and your adrenaline begins to go up. Adrenaline is that thing in your body and it kind of gets your heart racing and you start going. I call it vibrating. I feel like I'm vibrating. Now you may feel bothered on the inside. You may start feeling defensive. And that may just be what's happening on the inside, or it may start showing on your face. My husband has a very blank face, so there can be a whole lot going on the inside of him, and still, on the outside, he looks very blank. Now, usually with me, and I think all of you know me well enough to know that when something's going on inside of me, it immediately begins to show on my face. I don't keep it hidden very good. My eyes may get wide. They may get narrow. I may start doing things with my lips. But you can usually tell I'm upset. I don't hide it very good, even if I try. You may begin to enter into a verbal conflict. You may begin to say things immediately to the other person. Or you pull in. You pull in. You withdraw. You get quiet. You pull back. from the relationship. You pull back from communication. Now, however the conflict goes, you're also going to have a reaction. If the conflict ends the way you want to, hey, you're pleased, you're happy, you feel like you won, you made your point, they're not going to do it anymore, whatever it is. If it's unsuccessful, there's still stuff going on. Because very often, the conflict may technically be over because you've said it's over and the other person said it's over, but it ain't over. Because inside there's still the anger. There may still be pride. You may feel defeated. So you're feeling bad about yourself. You feel like, you've been left powerless. The other person has all the power. They're the one that wins. They always win. They always get their way. You may be filled with self-pity. You may be wounded. You may even be revengeful. I'll smile now. I'll say the conflict's over now, but I'm going to get even sooner or later. We're going to talk about keeping score in a few minutes. So those are some of the things that actually we begin to feel when a conflict is starting. But again, I want to remind you that there are dangers in avoiding the conflict. Because if we just continue to stuff it down, if we don't talk it out, if we don't learn how to resolve conflict biblically, there's going to be changes that aren't made. And you know what? There's a lot of changes. All of us have changes that need to be made. It may be changes inside of us. It may be a change in our perspective. It may be a change that's needed at work. It may be a change that's needed in your family. It may be a change in a friendship, that if the friendship is going to last and be a good, healthy relationship, something needs to change. But if you just keep quiet, if you just stuff it down, the change is not going to be met. Resentment will continue to build up. Some conflict is kind of hot and loud and aggressive and yelling. But a lot of conflict, it's on the inside and it's slowly boiling. When Mercy and Jerry are cooking in the kitchen, sometimes they put a pot on the back burner and they turn it on low. And it just keeps cooking and keeps cooking and it keeps cooking and it keeps boiling. And that's like us. And you know what? That pot can boil not just for a week, not just for a month, not even for a year. I have worked with people that they've had that pot boiling on the stove for 30, 40, 50 years. And they haven't forgotten, and they're still upset. And very often, when there's anger, and particularly when it's on the inside and it's not being expressed, you're not solving the problem. You're not managing the conflict. You're not talking it out with someone. There's often a displacement of emotions. What does that mean? Well, that means the husband goes to work. He has a conflict at work, but he has a powerful, domineering boss that he feels like he can't talk to, that he feels like I can't tell him how I feel. And so the frustration and the anger is building up inside that man, but he can't deal with it at work. He can't tell the boss what he thinks, so he comes home and he beats his wife. There's a lot of that goes on in Kenya. If you don't beat the wife, maybe you kick the dog. But the anger gets vented somewhere. If you keep it inside, you're probably going to have an ulcer. You may have a heart attack. You may have a stroke. It takes a physical toll. But also, it comes out and it hurts other people, and very often it hurts people that weren't even involved in the conflict. I mean, it wasn't the wife's fault that the husband's unhappy at work. She wasn't there. She's not the one that did it. But she's the one receiving the brunt of the anger. Oftentimes, if we're avoiding the conflict, we're trying to avoid talking to the person, we're avoiding actually going to them and talking, then again, the discontentment, the anger, bitterness, in fact, bitterness is really that slow pot on the stove, because anger's more immediately volatile. But bitterness is where it has kind of congealed. It's hard now. I mean, now there's bitterness. And I've been bitter at that person for the last 20 years, and I'm not talking to them. And very often, it not only turns into all these bad things that are really very toxic within us. But if we can't talk to the person we need to talk to, we usually begin talking to somebody else. Gossip, backbiting. So we go and we start telling somebody else how we feel and how we were mistreated and what that person did to us and what they said and what they did, and aren't they awful? And we want to be heard. We want someone to understand us. We want someone to maybe feel bad for us. And you know what we just did? We just enlarged the conflict. Because now that we've told someone else, they often then, have you heard the term take up the offense? Yeah, they take up the offense. I mean, here, John, here, the problem is between us, but I don't talk to you about it. I go and talk to Mercy about it. And now Mercy is mad at you too, because she's heard my side of it and what you did and what you said and how that hurt me. And now she's mad at you too. And you know what? She wasn't even there. You can give the conflict back to me. Okay, there we go. But that's what we do. And that's how it spreads and now causes conflict between other people. And so the conflict spreads and it grows. Well, let's look at the 5 stages then that we can really begin to understand. 1 is tension development. 2, very quickly leads to confusion. And then number 3 is injustice collection. Number 4 is confrontation. Number 5 is adjustment. Now, I think it's interesting that conflict follows these 5 stages. When we talked about the other things, like 4 types, well, okay, it could be this type or that type. If we talked about the 2 main issues, well, it could be substantive or it could be personal. But these 5 follow this sequence. The time may vary. The time of each stage may be different. but it never skips a stage. It never skips a stage. And the good news is the conflict can be resolved at any stage. At any stage, you can resolve the conflict. But sooner is better and later is worse. It gets harder the longer you wait. And it's important, Shawchuck says, just ask, what's happening here? What's happening here? And that's why we've said we want to understand the conflict, because if you'll stop and say, okay, God, what is happening here? You know what? He can show you that it's about territory. He can show you it's interpersonal. He can show you, okay, this is more of an emotional issue. It's not substantive. It's not really a critical issue. And that may help you to see, okay, what's going on here? Why is that other person upset at me? Why am I upset at them? And now how can we begin to handle it? So let's look at tension development. Now, I want you to think about recent conflicts you've had, or maybe one you're still having. And I think you'll see all of these, you'll begin to see, yeah, that was exactly what happened. Because all conflict starts here at tension development. You know, you just feel like something's wrong. Now, you may sense that something's wrong inside of you. You know, let's say you start to get angry. Well, you know, okay, I'm feeling angry about something. Maybe it's not inside you. Maybe it's with the other person. You notice they've gone quiet. You know they're not smiling. You feel like they're avoiding you. Okay, something's wrong. So whether you sense something wrong inside of you or whether you sense something different in them, listen to your senses. It may seem insignificant, but you know it's not insignificant. And if you treat it like it's insignificant, if you try to ignore it, if you say it'll go away, it doesn't. It doesn't. And you may say, yeah, but I'm not sure what's going on. That's the point. You're not sure what's going on, so find out. Find out. Talk out the misunderstanding. You know, at this stage, this is what amazes me. And hey, I have been as guilty of this as you are. But at that moment, it's like at the first moment that you sense something's wrong. Either I can tell that, hey, I've gotten kind of offended. I don't like what Wambui said to me. Why did she say that? Who does she think she is? You know, those are the thoughts that are going through my head. If at that very moment, I mean, the conflict is 1 minute old. Okay, it's only 1 minute old. If I say to Wambui, Wambui, that really hurt. Why did you say that? Do you know that most conflicts will be solved right then? Right then. It won't get any bigger. It won't go any further. Because most of the time that we get upset and that we get angry and that most of the time the other person doesn't know it. Do you know that most of the time they didn't mean to hurt you? Now there are a few people who may want to hurt you, but most people don't. Most of the time, if I stopped right at that minute and said, Wambui, what was that about? And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, when you said this, that sounded like you were attacking me. And she goes, oh no, that wasn't what I meant, right? She's able to explain what she meant, what she was thinking, why she said it. Maybe she used the wrong word. Maybe I thought her tone was aggressive and she didn't mean to sound that way. We can stop it right there. Right there. Because at this point, it's just between the two of us. We've sensed something's going on, and we solve it right then. And there's no harm done yet. Proverbs 18:19 says, "A brother offended is harder to be won than a strong city. And contentions are like the bars of a citadel." A citadel is like Fort Jesus, if you've ever been to Fort Jesus in Mombasa. And you know, when you have a fort, they're built for protection, and there's big, strong iron bars, even stronger than these iron bars on the windows. And think about that. This may be your literal brother. This may be your mother or your father. This may be your husband or your wife. Do you really want the conflict to go to the stage where now you're fortified and there's iron bars? I mean, there's a war? Because a brother offended is going to be harder to be won. So let's stop the offense when it's small. Let's clear up the misunderstanding while it's tiny before it grows. In fact, Jesus said this. This is a key verse, key verse on conflict resolution in the Bible. We're going to talk about it and keep going back to it over the next number of weeks. Matthew 5:23 through 26, Jesus said, "Therefore, if you are presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, then come and present your offering. Make friends quickly with your opponent at law while you are with him on the way, so that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Truly I say to you, you will not come out of there until you have paid up the last cent." Now picture this. Jesus is saying, you're coming to church on Sunday morning, and you're bringing your offering to put it in the basket with Jessica. And you remember that, you know what? I think Mary's upset at me. Now notice, you're not upset at Mary. It says you remember that your brother has something against you. Again, you've sensed that they've gone quiet. They're avoiding you. Maybe you had an argument and they said some things, and you know they're mad at you. It's saying, this is so important. You just leave your offering, you leave church, you go find the person, and you make it right. In other words, we need to deal with it immediately. Now, we don't like that. There are all kinds of rationalizations we have about why we're not going to go and talk it out right then. But I want you to understand from the very beginning, you're not arguing with me. You're arguing with Jesus, okay? Tell him why you didn't want to go. And it says, make friends quickly with your opponent. You see, he was your brother. Now he's become your opponent. He says, make friends quickly. Get back to being friends quickly. Deal with it quickly. And we'll see how this passage compares with Matthew 18 later. But in both passages, you're the one that ends up in jail. You're the one that ends up in prison. You know, it's amazing how we think we're going to not talk to the other person. We're going to punish them by not having a relationship with them. Guess who's in jail? You are. We'll see that. But we need to deal with it immediately. So if you sense that someone has something against you, Find out what it is. You know, very often I offend someone, and I can tell you, I'm not looking for a fight. I'm a very nice person. I really am. And I love everybody, and I want everybody to love me. So I don't do mean things to hurt somebody. But sometimes, just because of the way I said it, or I said it fast, or I was in a hurry, or I was more dramatic than I should have been, and the other person thinks I'm mad at them. The other person gets offended. They go, why did you talk to me like that? But you know what? If you don't tell me, I won't know it. If I sense that now you're acting funny, then I have to take the responsibility to come to you and to say, Evans, I know you're always quiet, but now you're extra quiet. Did I offend you? Did I do something that hurt you? And when I ask you that, you need to tell me the truth. You see, we need to speak truth with each other. Don't say, no, I'm fine, when you're not fine. The person's trying to solve the conflict. They're trying to understand. You know, if somebody comes to you and says, is there something wrong? They're wanting to understand. They're wanting to apologize. They love you and they want to resolve the conflict. So don't sit there and say, no, I'm fine. I mean, have you ever said that to somebody? You've said, is there anything wrong? And they go, no, I'm fine. Well, obviously they're not. You know, husbands and wives do this to each other all the time. No, I'm just fine. Just leave me alone. You know, and you're like, obviously not fine. Okay. So we need to go immediately. Because right after the tension development comes confusion. Now, we said the time may vary. So the time, from the time the tension began to develop until you're really confused. I mean, hey, it could be 2 minutes, it could be 10 minutes, it could be a day. I mean, again, the time's going to vary. But after the tension, if you didn't go and solve the problem, now you're entering in to the confusion stage. Because, you know, you're confused about what happened. If you're the one who's offended, you know, I'm wondering, what was Jerry thinking? Why did he say that to me? Why did he do that? What's his motive? I mean, I'm trying to figure this out. Instead of just going and asking him, it would be so much faster and easier if I just asked him. But no, I'm trying to figure it out inside my own brain. And this is when communication usually breaks down and we start avoiding. And so we're not defining the issues with each other. You know, I'm not even sure what the issue is. Maybe John quit talking to me and I have no clue why. Why did he quit talking to me? But again, if I don't ask, I'm not going to know. You know, this is where we need to discuss what actions or changes resulted in the conflict. This is where we need to talk it out and talk about what happened and what's the decision. And maybe we begin to renegotiate. This is a big one in marriage because often, you know, there's confusion. It's like, okay, I thought Les said he was doing this, and now he did something else. Well, at that point, I've got one of two choices. I'm either going to get angry because he's obviously wrong, because he said he was going to do the other thing and he didn't do it. Or I'm going to say, okay, I'm confused. You know, in the confusion confusion stage, guys, just admit you're confused. Just say, okay, I'm confused because I thought you said you were going to do this and then you did that, so what's happening? Just ask. You're confused, so ask. It can be solved at that stage. You know, think about Genesis 32, 24 through 30, when Jacob wrestled with God. And I like that picture. It's really an amazing picture of Jacob holding on to God and saying, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. We need that kind of tenacity. You know, where I care enough about my relationship with Jerry that I'm going to grab hold of him and I'm going to say, you know what? I'm not letting Jerry go. I'm not letting this relationship go. I am going to hold on to him, and we've got to work this out. You know what we usually say? Well, forget him. I'm just not going to speak to her anymore. Now, if you're married to the person, that's really hard. Okay? I mean, what are you going to do? You're just going to get a divorce from this person, go get another wife, divorce them, go get it, because I guarantee you're going to have conflict with all of them. And yet many times we go through jobs or we go through friendships like they're tissue that you just blow your nose and throw it away. Instead of holding on and not giving up. You see, he held on to God and it was worth it. We need to hold on to the relationships and it'll be worth it. Don't let the devil win. Guess who wants to be the winner in this conflict? The devil. He came to steal, kill, and destroy. Don't let him win. Keep communication open so that you can talk it out and understand one another.